Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which is wrapped in so many layers of turbulence. I've lost count. I'm sure you have as well. Climatic, geopolitical, political. Just take yourself down oh, and of course, the information superstorm, which to me makes the climate superstorms almost, well, less significant. If we don't get the information environment right, we're not going to get the rest of it right. I'm pleased to meet up here on my platform with Joe. Now I used to call you Joe Romm, and I just noticed on your podcast here, Joe Romm. Which was I
It,
wrong?
it always it's funny, Andy. It's actually always we've always called it in the family Rome. The family myth or lore was that it was shortened from Romanoff. Although I don't know, as I checked more, in later years, I don't know if that was true. And then since everyone always says, after a while, stopped correcting people, but
Okay,
generally most of us call it Rome.
okay,
And
we'll stick with Rome.
I answer to both. I we live in a world where someone can mispronounce my name. I tell them what the name is, and then they correct me. So
Right.
uh, you know, um,
Yeah, and I realized, I mean, nearly all of our communication, except I think for once or twice, was through like typing, not through talking to each other.
well,
And I,
we didn't have. I mean, when we were doing most of this was pre-Zoom, pre-pandemic
yep.
stuff. So yes, it is delightful to see you and to be on your platform.
Yeah, so let's get into it. Taylor Swift. It is when I tell people about the Taylor Swift connection, they're like, "Wait a minute, he's a climate wonk." So I guess we'll start very quickly with, of course, it is the release date for her latest epic album, and as you were just saying, you were up till 3 in the morning listening to the new record, and you have a daughter
Yeah,
who obviously you're co-podcasting with
yeah.
on that. You claim there's a storytelling aspect to the podcast. I listened to a couple episodes, and so just tell us what has pulled you into that. I assume part of it's just I shouldn't say jest, but it's about connecting with a daughter,
Well,
which I
look,
think is really
yeah,
cool.
this evolved over time. I've written some books. When you've written a lot, when you write for a place like the Times, you get a lot of feedback. You kind of learn what people like and how you have to write. And you probably I spent a lot of. I had a blog, Climate Progress, probably how I'm best known to a lot of the your listeners and viewers. And so I worked hard, got a lot of feedback. You get likes, shares, time on page, how many people click through the headline. So you learn a lot about that. And there's a story I tell about my daughter, which is that, when she was 3, she started saying blah, blah, blah to me. And, I was okay with her, kids repeat things they hear. I was fine with that if she knew what it meant. So I asked her if she knew what blah, blah, blah meant. And she said, it's when daddy says something that doesn't matter. Uh, so she did know at the age of
Yeah.
3. And I had a PhD in physics. I thought I knew a lot about communications, but, I was not communicating with my daughter. And I learned pretty quickly. You need to tell stories. And, over the years, the great climate communicator, Ed Maybach from George Mason, I was on a podium, on a panel with him, White House communications panel in 2015. And he said, numbers numb, stories sell. And that really, has influenced my thinking. So yeah, I have studied storytelling, and I've written a couple books, how to go viral and reach millions. And I've always been trying to figure out, and let's say, I got into the climate space and communication space because scientists back, 20 years ago weren't doing a great job of communicating. And so I had been raised by a newspaper editor. And so, I try to help teach, storytelling. And, as my daughter, shared, the original storytellers were the great bards, right? And they sang their stories, the heroic journalistic stories. And so they use their memory tricks and the rhyme and alliteration and metaphor and irony and all that, and the hero's journey. And I learned through my daughter, that the modern day songwriters, singer-songwriters, the modern day bards, right? And she introduced me to many. Taylor Swift, I think, has emerged as a great storyteller. Certainly, Time Magazine, when they named her Person of the Year, in December 2023, said she's the master storyteller of the modern era. And I came to see that she was trying to use the classical storytelling techniques. And she does sort of think of herself as a classical poet, right? She put out a whole album, the Tortured Poets Department. And I have been a Shakespeare buff. I actually wrote a whole, I just was digging it up. I actually, in 1988, I published an article in the journal Hamlet called, the journal Hamlet Studies called Why Hamlet Dies. So I saw her as, I came to see that, you could interpret her songs using classical poetry techniques, and you could also use her lyrics to teach people foreshadow and irony and metaphor. And there are circumstances that led to this podcast. Somebody heard me do a podcast on the book How to Go Viral and Reach Millions and talk about storytelling, and they approached me did I want to do a podcast? And then when it occurred to me I could do this with my daughter, and frankly, I couldn't do it without her, because who wants to hear me, yes. So, it's a conflation of things. And I really became a very big Taylor Swift fan, as anyone who listens to, you have my climate books here.
Some of it, yeah.
Yeah. There is this other book, which I wrote in 2018, the How to Go Viral and Reach Millions book, which is the all about what I learned about writing headlines and storytelling and metaphor and irony and all these things. So I know it may seem strange, but I used to be a Shakespeare fanatic, and I do think of Taylor in her own way as a modern day Shakespeare, so it may seem strange to people, but you're a musician and a songwriter, and I think we can't. It's hard being in the climate space and only thinking about climate all day long. I don't know that that's a sustainable thing to do. So I do recommend to people find something that's completely different, right? And spend some time doing that. I think you have followed that. I'm very interested, by the way. I don't know as much about you on the music side. I'd certainly love to hear, your thoughts on how your songwriting and studying of music has influenced you as a writer, and now as someone who does has a platform. I'm not hearing you.
No, I muted because our dogs are going crazy because
yes, I heard
something was being delivered. That never happens on Zoom.
Yeah.
No, music to me, storytelling. The music part of me, as you said, is a tonic for the journalism and blogging part, for sure. I just wrote a song called "Life is a Band," which I've just premiered at a couple places here.
Oh, congratulations.
In Maine, and it's about finding a way to make music that the solitary voice, the solo singer songwriter, which is what I worked for a long time.
Yeah,
is not like being in a band. Where you have tensions and creativity and different kinds of skills come together. And with my blogging, that's what I was trying to do with .earth all that time, was to try to forge some kind of nexus that's better than the individual. And even climate, when you think about climate, there is no one story. There's no one. There's no one audience. There's no one anything. So it's about, to me, the richness you can get. Now with a single song, I love like the lead of an article, unless as news articles suck, because it's just, here's what happened, here's the details.
Right.
But, and sorry about the dogs.
Okay.
But like I have some songs I'm pretty proud of. They're my best leads that I ever wrote. One is "When I'm Feeling So Low That Roadkill Looks Lucky." This happens more times than you might like to hear. And I go to a bar and get a beer. So it's like to capture the attention. Your blogging certainly captured the attention in your headlines when you were doing that stuff. So, and now we have Taylor Swift, who's clearly good at everything, and also has worked with super talented
Yes.
uh, songwriter producers like the Swedish guys who've been getting a lot of attention the last
Max
24 hours.
Max Martin and Shell Bach, it is interesting to me, you know, as a writer, you know, I have always tried to study great writers. I'm sure you have too. You know, you probably have your inspirations. George Orwell's essays were, you know, an inspiration to me. I'm not wanting, I don't want to think I'm comparing myself to Orwell, but we have writers that we admire, and the greatest songwriters of all time were Lennon and McCartney. But Max Martin is number 2 now, you know, behind McCartney, and is soon, I think, going to pass him. And it is kind of amazing that 2 Swedish guys are 2 of the greatest English language songwriters in the world. I mean, when you think about it. So that's just these kinds of things. Just as it was amazing that 2 guys who met each other at the age of 16 in a small working class town in England became, you know, 2 of the greatest storytellers and songwriters of all time. I mean, it's always fascinating to me, you know, how someone, why does a couple of people just go stand head and shoulders above everyone else? And so, yeah, I hope you'll, you know, send me some of your songs. I love, you know, the singer-songwriter is like I said, the original storyteller, the bards, and, you know, the original phrase, like a Rolling Stone, right? And the term phrase Rolling Stone comes from, you know, I think Muddy Waters and also Hank Williams used it to describe the bard, you know, the singer-songwriters and the bards who traveled from town to town and didn't set down roots. And that's why it became Rolling Stone magazine, and Like a Rolling Stone, the song, and you know, the Rolling Stones. All of that is an ode to the traveling bard. Oops.
Yeah, same deal. Yeah, the broadsides of old were recited news in the town square,
Yes.
and that had to have a rhythm and a resonance as well. So now we're going to transition a little bit to.
Oh, but I do want to tell people, go watch, you know, my podcast, Decoding Taylor Swift.
Yep. I'm going to show the link too in a bit.
Okay. And you know, I do hope that I do think if you listen to like the first season, you will learn a lot about foreshadow and the hero's journey and metaphor and how Taylor uses them, and how they are part of her success is her mastery of that. And I think anyone who masters these techniques, in this world, as you say, there's a fire hose, you know, there's a Niagara Falls of information and competition for your attention, right? And that attention, the thing that best grabs and holds people attention is a compelling story. And if you that's what you have to know, how to tell a story and all the elements of storytelling if you want to get noticed, because this device of ours that we carry with us, right, at all times, that's my daughter, has every story, every cat video, everything, most compelling things ever put together, and it's got an algorithm that feeds you the stuff that's most compelling to you, right? So everybody has that, and if you want to break through, right, you're going to have to really take your game up. And, you know, I'll just say, speaking in public, you speak in public a lot, you know, 10, 15 years ago, you couldn't whip out your phone while someone's speaking and just stare at it. But now it's quite routine to be speaking to people who are barely paying attention, right? So whether you're a speaker or a writer, right, you better know how to grab and hold people's attention, or you're just going to disappear into the void and be, you know, just drowned out by this Niagara Falls of noise.
Yeah, that's even a line in that song I just mentioned, "Life is a Band." Audiences, what's it? Customers drinking and scrolling and yapping. Once in a while, some scattered clapping.
Yeah, nice.
Yep.
I like it. Yeah.
How do you break through? Um, and now I want to get to the idea of the
Please.
storytelling as it pertains to climate,
Yeah.
which is, as you well, as we said a couple minutes ago, it's many dimensions, many
Yes.
stories, and sometimes the audiences, you can actually toxify one audience by preaching to another one, and of course
Yes.
we're all in the same internet, so there's that crossover part. So how do you translate this basic ideas about storytelling and audience attention when you're dealing with an issue that has those dimensions? I want to get to that, but first I want to take us just to get back to current events.
Sure.
You did a CNN interview, I think, a few days ago about Trump at the UN and
Yes. Yep.
China.
Yep.
We are at a moment that I don't think you or I or anyone really anticipated how bad things could get when
No.
we were blogging back in the aughts and arguing about the relative merit of Obama's all
Yeah.
of the above strategy. So how do you wake up in the morning and what do you think about when you think about what's going on? To me, it brings to mind not just Orwell, but Bradbury.
Yeah.
You got the EPA. I did this slide a while ago for a talk. Fahrenheit 451 is you're basically using flamethrowers instead of water to put out fires. And so we're in a moment that just goes beyond. Do you feel like it is beyond? I mean, you were casting some warnings. You were yelling warning about the climate system, but I'm
Yeah.
not sure you foresaw this. I certainly didn't.
No. I think that these are dire times. I think we are on the precipice, and um, and part of it was created by the fossil fuel companies. They certainly have played their role in not giving up the fight on climate science denial, it is remarkable to me. This country is so polarized that you can turn people against, cheap, clean, renewable energy, right?
Yeah.
But I also point out to people, look what people turned against. People are turned out against vaccines, right, and wearing masks. Things that demonstrably help prolong their lives and be healthier. So in that world, if you can be persuaded against your own immediate health benefit, you can certainly be persuaded against stuff that's going to take a while to play out, right? And whose direct effects on you maybe are certainly not as obvious, right? So yeah, it is. We are in a very different world, and to me, by the way, it makes the storytelling more important, right? And I look, you've talked to a lot of scientists over the years, and I think journalists. I tell scientists, look, you're going to have to tell your own story, because once upon a time there were a lot of smart journalists who knew science and who did the translation for you, right? But we don't live in a world where those gatekeepers, those people don't exist so much more professionally, and everybody's job is to figure out how to break through themselves. You can't hope that your press release, right, is somehow going to you are your own bard, right? You're
Right.
you're your own town crier, and so you better learn what they know. And scientists have been vulnerable, right? We also live in a world where scientists have been stories have been told about scientists that, like, they're in it for the money, right? That their credibility has been undermined. And you and I, who have known a lot of scientists, know that they're not in it for the money. I'm not saying that people don't have professional pride and all these things, but it is what I realized in thinking about stories and blogging and writing is that science is anti-story, right? The point of the Enlightenment was to replace the story-based explanation of the world, right? We have floods because God is sending a sign that he's not going to send us any more floods, versus the scientific explanation, which is light ping-ponging inside a raindrop, right? And diffraction and all that stuff. And needless to say, one of those is a lot more memorable than the other, right? And so scientists have over the decades pulled themselves out of the narrative, right? You're abstract, right? No scientist name, we don't see the word I in a scientific study. We never learn why the scientist is intrigued by this or why they think it's important. They have to do it all abstractly. And so we live in a world where scientists haven't told, we don't see them as human because they don't tell the human story of themselves, their hero's journey story and all that. And it has set up a situation where this issue becomes so politicized. I tell people, if there's a world in the public sphere, a issue in the public sphere where if you don't tell your story, someone is going to tell a story about you, right, where you're the bad guy, right? Because unfortunately, if you're a change maker, you want the world to be different than it is, then the people who like the status quo, right, they're not going to like that. Machiavelli said that in The Prince, right? And so, you have to make a decision. Am I going to explain my human story, or do I go back to this, I'm going to throw numbers out at people and facts and charts, which is how I learned communications as a physicist. I got a PhD in physics, right? And you learn more and more, use big words, use charts, figures, numbers, right? Speak abstractly, don't tell personal stories, right? Well, these are maybe great for communicating to other physicists, but they are an epic disaster, right, for communicating to the public. So, I think that now more than ever, people do need to learn storytelling, because clearly this is what Donald Trump, and he's, I put him in the subtitle of the How to Go Viral and Reach Millions book. He has a distinct talent for a certain type of storytelling and capturing attention and repeating his message. He's very, very good at repeating his message. He's very, very good at one crucial figure of speech, one of the most hyperbole. And in fact, in The Art of the Deal, he explicitly says that he kind of realized that people aren't interested in the second best thing, right? So, you sell them the best thing. Everything is always the best thing. And so, look, he, we may say that, and conspiracy theories, by the way, they're a form of story, right? That's what a conspiracy theory is, a story-based explanation for events.
Yeah.
But it's just different from what you and I might consider to be the fact-based one. But it is compelling because it is a version of reality where the listener gets their own worldview confirmed, and the bad guys are the ones they view as bad guys. So yes, people are always going to like any story, even a fictional story, right? Remember that memo in the early 2000s that Frank Luntz wrote about how you communicate on climate? There's a specific line in which he says, a story that isn't true can be more compelling than a factual truth, right? So it's not news, right, that I can write a fictional story that will get more attention than a dry, non-fictional set of facts. And it's a painful lesson for someone who got the PhD in physics and had to spend 10 years, unlearning all of that stuff. Took a lot of effort. And I remember when I wrote one of my, in 2012, I published a book called Language Intelligence, which talks about the figures of speech. And that book actually did pretty well. Yeah, that's the quote. I'm glad you said that you got it. This is really important, right? Because this was Frank Luntz's memo to basically conservatives and climate deniers saying, it's not too late to fight the science. Like the window, you remember there's a line about the window on the science is closing. I don't know that you and I would have suspected that we would still have a White House in 2025 that could issue a full out, climate science denial paper. Now they have at least kind of shut that down because I think they may have realized they went a bit too far. But the point that he was making is this sentence here, which is a very scary sentence, but I think it reflects he is a smart guy, right? Whatever you want to say about Frank Luntz, he knows about words, and he's kind of, as you know, tried to distance himself from his earlier work. If you hear him talk,
yeah.
But this is still powerful stuff, and it's important to understand our side's job. And I say our side, I mean the side of science. And I don't want to say that all science is black and white. We don't have to, but there is a, intergovernmental panel on climate change. And look, the National Academy of Science has put out a report, right, just last month, in which they basically said, right, I quoted the quote in the interview. You probably can pull it up, where they said basically the fact that the human-caused greenhouse gas emissions warm the planet is really beyond dispute, right? I mean, it's just
right.
Simply not a matter of scientific dispute. It's not a hoax, right? All that stuff. So, I think that this is the world we live in, and we live in a world where there's an algorithm, and now people control that algorithm who don't use it to viralize the truth, but they use it to viralize stuff that I think you and I would agree is basically disinformation or misinformation, whatever you want to call it. Again, I'm not saying everything that they do is that, but by and large, the algorithm is not weeding out stuff that is blatantly false or easily disproved. So this is the world that we live in, and I don't think that anyone has a choice. If you wish to be a change maker, if you don't think the world is optimal the way it is and it needs some social change, right, you are a person who wants to change the status quo. The status quo is built around stories, right? Tribes are built around stories, right? And worldviews are built around stories. And the people who like the status quo are going to spend a lot of money telling stories to protect the status quo and attack those who change the status quo. If you want to change the status quo, you're going to have to offer a better story and better communications of that story, right? Why should we go to all the trouble it would take to dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, right? That's a big deal.
It is a big deal. One thing on that front, I wanted to ask you if you felt, I wanted to ask you to reflect a little bit on the story we were all kind of trying to tell, and in different ways, which was about climate change is a serious problem, therefore do X. And who was cut out of that conversation? Back in 2015, John Sutter, who was at CNN at the time, did this really great video series called 2 Degrees. He went around the world ahead of the Paris talks and did some interviews. And he went to the most skeptical county in America on global warming, which Yale and others found.
Sure.
And he just did. It was in Woodward County, Oklahoma, and he did these stand-up interviews with people. And this always strikes me. This is, before the Clinton-Trump. And just listen to what this guy says. Let me see if I can get this set up. We weren't telling him the right story, I think. Here goes. Just listen for a second.
I'm not a real firm believer in climate change. Well, I'm employed in the oil field.
I have an oil and gas company.
If there's no oil field, there's no jobs.
Our whole economy runs on fossil fuels.
Now, you might say the environment is perfect today because God ultimately controls the environment. We're going to try to have a solar system big enough to supply all the needs of our house.
That's the line that's just mind-blowing to me. Here's a guy, he works for an oil company. He thinks God controls the environment.
Yeah.
And he was getting off the grid using solar energy in Oklahoma. And John went to his house and wrote a long piece about it. And, what do you think if he was, if activists came to Woodward County, Oklahoma with signs saying, worry about global warming, to a guy who's pretty obviously, the reason he's getting off the grid is he's libertarian. Like now, Bill McKibben has been highlighting people in Utah who are putting in those solar, plugged into the wall things. Were we missing something there? back in that run up, whether it was the climate bill in 2009, 2010, whether it was sort of Obama, were we missing those people by making it all about climate as opposed to clean energy? Just start with clean energy.
Well, look, Obama didn't like to talk about climate, and David Axelrod didn't like to talk about, and Rahm Emanuel didn't, and so that was the clean energy jobs bill. That was how it was marketed, and let me say two things. As the Yale people have shown, the number of people in this country who are hardcore deniers is a pretty small group. They're very noisy, and there's a lot of people with a lot of money who can amplify them, and but the number of people who are alarmed, is like 90 million or 100 million people. It's a very large number, and then even the people who are concerned, the next tier down, is a very large number. So, I want people to know that studies have shown that everybody thinks that their district is more conservative than it really is, right? And so, and I'm sure you had this response when I blogged. I remember one of the earliest emails I got was, thank you for your blog. I used to think I was the only one who thought that climate was a serious problem because no one ever talks about it, right? That was the other Yale finding, right? Was that people, their friends and people don't hear from conversations on climate change, more than even once a month. And, most people, people have lots of problems they have to deal with, right? And so if you're trying to convince people that something's an existential threat, right, but no one they know is talking about it, then their heuristic shortcut is going to be, it's like you're on the Serengeti desert and saying there's a lion coming, right? But no one else is moving, right? So, I think, so on the one hand, I want people to understand, yes, there are a lot of people who are alarmed. I don't think, that the environmental community has done a good job of activating them. But yes, I do want to say that I think that by and large, communications in this space has not been great. And sometimes it's been very bad. And it has played in the hands of the people who don't want to do anything. And you hear people still talk about the Green New Scam, right? That's sort of their
right, just yesterday.
Right, keep saying it. And, the Green New Deal never became a thing. But the other side, Fox News ran stories on it so much so that, within a few months, it became very negative to half the country. And I think a large part of the other country never really knew what it was. And so if you want to do effective messaging, right, you do need to have some simple messages that feed into a worldview, and you have to repeat them endlessly. And like a bar, you're going to have to go from town to town and sing and shout about this and do it in a memorable way so that other people remember what you say and repeat it. And a lot of what storytelling is about and using the memory tricks of the great bards is to be memorable. So one of the things I say on the podcast, Decoding Taylor Swift, is if people don't remember what you say, it doesn't matter what you say, right? So one of your early jobs is to be memorable. And whatever you want to say about Donald Trump, he knows how to be memorable, right? Yeah. And by the way, Taylor also knows how to do that, right? She's emerged as, outside of the political sphere, Taylor Swift is probably the most viral person on the planet. Certainly on the very short list, and with a world tour, that is netted now like $2 billion. And so she understands the importance of storytelling and of metaphor, which she uses a lot, and irony, which she uses a lot, and repetition and alliteration and all of these things, and marketing, endless marketing, right, of every single kind. I mean, she almost single-handedly brought back vinyl records, right? She's responsible for like 4 of the top 5 vinyl record sales, right? And got a lot of other artists to see, I can make a lot of money in vinyl, right? So there's no marketing channel she does not pursue, right? And So, and she's got a movie. She's dropping a movie at 3 p.m., which I'm going to go to see. But there's a lesson to be learned here, right? The point is, you have to be know what the right the message you want to push is. Hopefully, it's the truth, right? You have to know how to tell it in a memorable fashion, and have to know how to distribute it. Now, the other piece is you should have the right messenger. And I would say, we haven't always done that as well as we could, and we haven't always had the best message. I'm not going to disagree, with any of that. Like I said, scientists, I never had to take a single class in communications to get my degree. Maybe you now have to take one, but learning communications should be as important to a scientist as learning calculus, right? You have to know a lot of math and calculus to get a major degree in science.
But right now, scientists have to do that just to maintain their work, their basic work, not even to sell their results.
Right.
Because of NSF being decimated, and
yeah,
how this country has lost the idea that the science narrative is a force for good, is to me one of the most explosive and devastating realities. I mean, we could all talk about how to sell climate change, but we're in a country now where a big chunk of it doesn't even value the enterprise itself.
No, this is the attack on elitists and the attack on independent sources of information that has been going on for decades. And look, I would just say to following people on this, because scientists and progressives often look down on marketing as some form of, whatever you want to call it, propaganda, manipulation, whatever it is. And unfortunately, you can do it in a way in which it is truthful and therefore legitimate. It is easier to make made up content go viral, obviously, right? Because one of the things that makes made up content go viral is awe, shock value, novelty, right? So if I can make stuff up, right, it's very easy for me to do those things. But let's be clear. Coca-Cola keeps advertising. Why? Because if they stopped and Pepsi kept doing all their advertising, they would lose market share, right?
Yeah,
So,
I don't know if you remember way back in our blogging days. Do you remember Al Gore announced a big commitment? It was like $150 million over a certain period of time for ads on climate change. I wrote a piece. I talked to a guy, a marketing professor, Lewis and Clark University, I think, and he said, Pepsi, he said just what you said, Pepsi and Coke spend billions on advertising to move the needle like that much. And you're talking about 100 million over 10 years. And so it's like, oh, geez.
Well, and it's interesting in the Coke and Pepsi thing is, yes, their advertising only moves the needle a little. But if they stopped advertising, they understand the needle would move over time. It would just keep moving and moving and moving, right?
Right,
So
they lose,
we have
right, they lose
this interesting issue where, yes, you're right. It is hard, by the way, to persuade funders to fund communications because they will say, well, look, it doesn't move the needle much. Well, in a tactical sense, it doesn't. But if you don't do it at all,
right,
clearly it is fatal, right? So it is in a very perverse world that we live in. But yes, unfortunately, there has been a massive marketing campaign against science. And if you don't, and it's easy, we're easy targets because we're not great at messaging and no one funds us to do messaging, right? We've all just taken it for granted that it's obvious, right? You talk to scientists, oh, I don't have to say that because it's obvious. It's obvious that science is great, but no, and whether it's the H-1B visas or the funding of vaccines or feeding people overseas, actually being good for American farmer, whatever it is. I mean, it is frustrating, I'm sure. And you and I have had disagreements over the years. But in the great sphere of things, we're arguing about like 5%.
Exactly. I know. It feels like it was I wouldn't say a waste of time, but lessons learned and the way things have played out. There are a couple of good things have come in as questions. One of them is going to amuse you to no end.
Yeah.
It's Mohammed al-Saban.
Ah.
He says nonsense. He was the negotiator. He was the lead Saudi negotiator. And here he is on LinkedIn right now. I don't know if you followed him on Twitter the recent years. He's uncloaked. He was the official Saudi guy at IPCC meetings and UNFCCC meetings. And then now on Twitter, he's like completely uncloaked. We were trying to stop everything. To a certain extent, it wasn't about narrative. It was about being quiet and gumming up the works. And, he and Don Perlman et al. Were just really, they weren't thinking about narrative. They were just thinking about power, which is another reality too. And now a more constructive comment has come from Doug Grant, who asked you, this is something you definitely think about. Does Joe agree that net zero and true 100% decarbonization is one of those stories? Even Tom Steyer advocated sequestration to reduce from 420 to 350. Passed bill, on the issue that zero emissions will not reduce CO2 to stable lethality. Now, you and I think, are both not fans of the net zero message.
I think, well, first of all, I'm very impressed that Saban listens to you, that he's tuning in. Congratulations. That's a big deal. He presumably that means, yes, your what you're doing matters. So congratulations. I have not been on Twitter or X for a long time. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. If people want to find me.
Yeah, I noticed that. It's good.
Right. I realized, I used to blog a lot, and then then the Center for American Progress shut down all of Think Progress, which included Climate Progress. But I've realized that LinkedIn is a very underutilized place. And but you can still I just use the same techniques I discussed and learned. And I've had 2 million impressions in the last 8 months, and my followers have gone up by over a factor of 3. So it works. I'm learning about the algorithm, because the LinkedIn algorithm is tricky. But yes, and now you see, the nice thing about LinkedIn is I'm now Joe Podcaster Romm. And yeah, look, the attack. I understand. Where the Saudis are coming from, and we're now in a world where it's easier to speak however you want. So this second question is an important question. So, what is one of the biggest failings of the climate movement and climate communicators in general? We try to. You will never succeed messaging on process, right? You need to message on outcomes that matter to people, right? And by the way, right, Frank Luntz and have to know how to message, right? And come up with the right phrase, right? Frank Luntz famously is the one who said, don't say inheritance tax, say death tax, right? Who would want to tax death, right? So, messaging built around process is going to simply never move people. They're going to tune out, right? Cap and trade, right? What a terrible messaging, right? If your bill is going to help people's health and well-being and make them richer or lower their costs, message around that. It doesn't mean you don't message on climate change, by the way. I think that John Marshall and others have shown, and Tony Lazowitz has shown, and I speak to them regularly. I spoke to Tony again, when we were both at the Aspen Ideas Fest Climate in Chicago. You should always include climate change in your messaging. You have to know how to talk about climate change, but to not talk about it is simply to abandon one of the major reasons why we're doing all this. But no, what is net zero? It is a process, and also it sounds inherently wishy-washy, right? Because zero, how do you put a modifier in front of the word zero, right? If I'm a regular person who doesn't follow this, I'm just going to look at that and say, this looks like a euphemism, right? It looks like some form of doublespeak. It looks like the kind of language marketers use, right? New Coke or whatever it is to sell something, right? But it has no inherent meaning, right? You want to mention, when you listen to Arnold Schwarzenegger message on climate, he will always start with 9 million people are killed every year globally because of pollution, right? I'm sure you've heard him say that, right? And so you do have to, and the same with decarbonization. What does that even mean? And it is a chain of reasoning. And by the way, the worst of all is what? 1.5 C?
I know.
2 C? Are you crazy?
And as soon as you have to untangle it, it becomes a complete mind-numbing journey.
So let's just agree, catastrophic failure of messaging going on even today, right? And we are easy pickings for people who wish to make fun of what we're doing. And so now the other side is also very good, by the way, at picking out something that one person's most extreme statement is, and then blowing it up and make it seem like that's what everyone who wants climate action believes, right? And so, and there's not much we can do about that. We certainly do not control the voices of everybody, and I'm not here to tell every person that their messaging, isn't right. I do think there's bad messaging, but everyone's voice deserves to be heard. I do think it's incumbent on anyone who wishes to share their voice in the public realm to spend some time and understand what's going on in the public realm, and to understand whether certain messages are better than other messages. Doesn't mean your message is wrong, but you can spend a lot of time talking about a process. And I will just say, you are you're not even preaching to the choir, because most of the choir could not tell you what, if you ask 95% of people what net zero means, what are they going to say?
Yeah. And one thing along these lines, a long time ago, I think it was on .earth the first time, it's actually a question I asked Jim Connaughton at one of the climate treaty things. Would we have been better off with an intergovernmental panel on climate risk than an intergovernmental panel on climate change? Because risk is the thing people think about. And climate change is one driver of risk because it's changing hazards. But, and I repeat this a lot these days, I think communities care about risk or opportunity, right? Change in the climate is very distinct and sort of tertiary to that. And Diana Liverman, who was a great IPCC author and University of Arizona, she just retired recently. She made this vividly clear in one thing she said on one of my shows, that probability of harm is risk. Probability of change, probability of an extreme storm is about the weather, but probability of harm is about risk, and that can be changed through better housing, building codes, moving away from a coastline, and cutting emissions. Does that feel like it has some value?
Well, we've had discussions about this. In the past, I think. I'll say two things about this. One, sort of in the scientific, and one in the messaging. We're now on track for pretty high warming. And the worst case scenario is back. I did analysis, which I sort of haven't really. I think I posted something, but if for us to hit 5 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century is kind of close to business as usual right now. I'm hesitant to, there's so many factors that, you need to put in a range. But as the last Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the review of the literature that was done, found that the risk skewed on the high side, right? That the chances of very low warming from a doubling of emissions to, we're at 420, and a doubling from pre-industrial 280 would be 560. So, a level we could easily hit this century and before century's end could easily lead to 7 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 degrees Celsius. I'm not saying it's the likely scenario, but it's clearly not off the table, right?
Sure.
And so this is, I would say, anything in the 5 Fahrenheit, 3 Celsius range is catastrophe. And again, it's this risk thing. We just end up crossing a lot of the thresholds that in the scientific literature are viewed as, this post, one of the most widely read posts. This was the posts, by the way, that get the most attention are on risk. Interestingly, that I do because it quotes the insurance people. The insurance people speaking up is a big deal because they are the ones who translate future danger and emissions into present value risk, right? And it matters because banks have to write you a 30-year mortgage, right? So they have to care about, your ability to have a house, and all that. So, I would say the following: people need to understand. There's been so much talk about 1.5C and 2C as a goal, as a target, that the people got persuaded it was going to be close to a reality, and they just tuned out the real risk, which we're now back in, which is that, hey, maybe the sensitivity is a little on the high side, which is what the science says it could easily be. And maybe we're not doing such a good job of emissions reductions as maybe we're not going to get net zero in 2050. Guess what, people? We're not. Sorry. Could we? Yes. Have I written more books, posted more articles on how to do that? As I published as much as anybody, that we could do it, we should do it, but let's be politically realistic. The climate action tracker people will tell you that the policies and actions in place of every single one of the top 10 countries emitters in the world is insufficient to keep us below 3C,
Right.
5F, right? That's just the reality. And you can hope and pray that some of those emitters are going to magically change course. But I will tell you what China just served up is weak tea and doesn't even stop them from continuing to grow their emissions for the next 5 years. Hopefully they are plateauing, but they have the option to keep going up. And so, and they're certainly building a lot of coal plants, and they're turning a lot of coal into chemicals, and they're importing a lot of gas from Russia, which is leaky. So, the risk of catastrophic warming is very, very real. And to not talk about that because you think it's going to turn some people off is just like telling people that you're not going to tell them if they come in with a cough and they smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day, that guess what? If you keep smoking those 2 packs, pretty sure that you're going to get sicker and ultimately have a ruined standard of living, a life, and ultimately untimely death. So
yeah, doesn't that also though support like Diana Liverman and others who focus on the need for vulnerability reduction now, along with emissions reduction? One of the fights I've had with Andrew Dessler of late is he still remains fixated on emissions reduction, and he's kind of said adaptation is, he still makes it a dirty word. And I think if you look at the science, including what you just described, it makes it all the more important to do the vulnerability reduction, which I don't use the word adaptation because we're maladapted to the current climate, not just the future climate.
Well, we've had discussions about this a long time ago, back and forth on writing. I'll say a few things on adaptation. I don't like the word. I hate the word resilience because that's just wishy-washy gobbledygook. You can have resilience from a gunshot wound, but it'd be a good idea to avoid the gunshot wound. We'll start with what the insurer said. The guy from Allianz that got all the attention was that when you get to 3C, 5 degrees Fahrenheit, you're talking about largely unadaptable stuff. It doesn't mean that you don't want to do stuff to deal with the changes. Obviously, everyone is going to have to, quote unquote, adapt, right? And humans are very adaptable, right? But we do have 8+ billion people going on 10 billion living in places that they chose because of what the steady sea level was, because of the rainfall, the heat level, the agricultural productivity, right? And guess what? You're going to have to move. People are already looking at moving from various islands, but we're going to have hundreds of millions of climate refugees in a world where 3 million refugees from Syria, right, blew up politics, from a Syrian drought, from the worst drought that hit that part of the world in 1,000 years, right, and a civil war that aggravated and in a vicious cycle, right? That immigration was disastrous, and much as immigration in this country, some of which is driven at the southern border from the climate being destroyed south of the border. And guess what? You look at the very reasonable climate model projections of what's going to happen to where people live, the 250 million people who live between the southern border and the Panama Canal or so, that keeps getting larger, right? They live near the coast or they rely on rainfall and a right climate to grow food. And so that's being blown up. So we are, headed to a level that is entirely possible that certain things can't be adapted to, right? In other words, we talked about this, this conversation came out of the whole how much sea level rises there going to be. And,
right.
My issue on sea level rise, which turns out to be one of yours, is, stop thinking about a static number by 2100. Think more about what the rate of change is going to be.
No new normal sea level, period.
Right. And if your sea level, let's say, imagine a world where your sea level is rising six inches a decade, which is certainly within the realm of possibility and maybe even likelihood by the year 2100. How do you adapt? What kind of a coastline? What do you do with ports? Everything's going to have to be floating, right? You're going to, it's very hard to imagine, and we're going to have to do it, right? Because, we're not doing anything to stop that, right? So, sometimes I wrote a piece, Nature saw that I was writing a lot about dust bowlification, and I wrote this piece called The Next Dust Bowl. And one of the points that I made is that, the word desert is the same root as to desert a place. It literally means an abandoned place, right? And the word river has the same root as the word rival, right? So the fight over water and the fact that things can get so dry that the adaptation is leaving, right? Adaptation can mean you have to leave, right? And getting people in coastal areas in this country, or even fire zones in this country, to not rebuild, right? Well, that would be a primary form of adaptation. It's a very hard sell, right? Because the story we tell is that we fight, we are resilient, right? We fight, we are doing things in opposition to nature. We always have. That's what humanity has been about, is a conquering of nature. However, nature is being driven up by us to change much faster than some species can't do this, right? And if they were, so anyway, I think that, and this gets to the point, if there's a massive disinformation campaign, which there is, against climate science being real, then just as you are able to turn people against solutions, you turn people against adaptation. Why should I believe you that I can't rebuild my home?
Oh, right? Yeah, no. That's why these fundamental systemic dynamics to me are so dangerous. The anti-science, as you say, the anti-science mania being pushed affects all of the responses. Any response that's delineated by science. I mean, the data are still very disturbing. This was 2021, Beth Tellman and others did this big study showing that all around the world, people are still moving into zones of flood hazard faster than zones of flood hazard are changing. We do have this, climate and coastal change remain a secondary determinant of what people do and where they do it. My friend Abram Lustgarten at ProPublica, where I worked briefly, wrote a whole book on migration within the United States from climate change. But it's all whatever he's writing about is still projections, because what people are still doing is moving to places.
Miami,
right.
Miami Beach of all places, and places that are going to be most likely uninhabitable by the end of the century. People are still buying property. Now, the world, I wrote pieces at Climate Progress trying to figure out when the coastal property bubble would burst. It has to, right? And it doesn't wait until the sea level happens, right? It waits until the smart money realizes that those are dead properties, right? That you won't be able to get the insurance, and therefore you won't be able to get the 30-year mortgage. But the result is that only rich people, people who can afford to lose the whole damn thing, self-insure, quote unquote, will be able to buy that property. And guess what? There are a lot of rich people. And what's more, in Miami, there's a lot of foreign rich people who park their money in property in Miami, and all these things that screw up, what might be a normal housing market. So yes, there will be, but it's already the case, as you know. I think it's already been shown that areas at greater risk are not appreciating in price as much as they used to, right? They appreciate slower than the areas that are safer. That's already showing up in the data. And at some point, they will stop rising in price. And like I said, basically, there won't be a market anymore. Someone will either be willing to swallow the entire risk themselves, right? And most of us can't afford, right, to buy a house and lose it, right?
No.
The class of people who can afford, and my brother lost his home in Katrina, right? That was,
right. Sorry, let me go back to that.
That was the other, story of how I got into this, because I was at the Department of Energy for 5 years and became acting assistant secretary of efficiency and renewables, and spent most of my time and most of my books talking about the solution to climate change, right? It was only August 29, 2005, which was 20 years ago, right? Very recent 20th anniversary. And I talk about that. Yeah, my TED talk that I did at Asbury Park, I tell that story. But yes, it was, my brother lived in Pass Christian, Mississippi. And that happened to be, just coincidentally, talk about coincidences in life, the site of the worst storm surge ever officially recorded in the United States, right? It's around 27 feet. It's always hard to tell exactly what the storm surge is, after disaster. But and his house was, turned into the inside of a washing machine. And he asked me if he should rebuild. And that got me talking to the top climate scientists, particularly those who are experts on hurricanes, that got me reading the literature and going to seminars. And I ended up realizing, the situation is more dire than I thought. I actually published the book, Hell and High Water. I think you showed that book. And then I decided I was going to stop doing clean energy consulting and become a full-time communicator. And I looked around for who was doing that. And that's how I ended up at the Center for American Progress, because they were doing blogs, and they were, said, well, you want to start a climate blog? We're for it. And I started part-time doing a post a week. And it started to catch on. And I went to people and I said, well, how do I, get more readers? And they said, well, you have to post every day, right? And then, et cetera, et cetera. So, one thing led to another, and that was 2000. I started blogging in 2006, which was relatively early in the blog. I was definitely not the first. Dave Roberts was blogging before me, and so was the War on Science. I can't believe he's now at the Washington Post. Yeah, Chris Mooney. Apologies, Chris. Yes, Chris was very influential. He was a big influence on me. Big reason that I was like, okay, you want me to blog? I'm very open to it. I thought, he was definitely ahead of the curve, as was Dave Roberts. So, that's what got me into it. Now it's interesting. I used to believe, and I used to blog that, oh, we would see these mini Pearl Harbors, right? That these climate extremes would eventually become so bad that everybody would agree we need to take action. So I did not foresee that the people who didn't believe in climate change would have so many distribution channels and be so good at messaging, right, that they could persuade people that, the LA fires had nothing to do with climate change, right? And that all these other, contributing factors, I'm not saying there aren't many contributing factors to that disaster, but, yes, the other side, the people who are denying climate change are very good at persuading people that this particular flood or that particular, it can be blamed on someone who has some minor, partial contribution to lack of preparedness or whatever it is. And your favorite villain is really the full cause. And so, yeah, we are, a lot of people are blind to the real changes that are happening because, and partly, by the way, the media continues to explain the connections between higher temperatures and droughts and higher temperatures and more intense rainfall and other aspects of climate change and less water accumulating in mountains as ice, as snow, so it gets drier in the summer. All of these things, again, I'm not saying these are the simplest messages, but if you don't try, then you're kind of screwed.
So we're kind of close to the end here. In fact, we've run a little bit over time. We could go a little longer, but maybe we should do a part 2 at some point. Nate, the house whisperer, who's a great communicator of heat pumps and other house home improvements that can make a difference, he says, here's his question, if you couldn't say climate change ever again and needed to reach a mainstream audience, what might you say?
Well, I'm a big fan of heat pumps, and heat pumps have, just so people understand what heat pumps are, right? Since I think people should understand, for a long time, the way you used electricity to make heat was to run it through a wire, copper wire, and heat up the wire, right? And that's very inefficient. And obviously, incandescent light bulbs, part of their inefficiency is they put out so much heat, right? And LED bulbs use the electricity very efficiently. And what heat pumps do is they don't use the electricity to directly create electricity. They use it to move the heat from outside inside. And because they use a reverse refrigeration cycle, they are able to extract heat even from air that's colder outside than it is inside. That is the miracle of the reverse refrigeration cycle. So, I would say, if you can't talk about climate change, look, a large number of technologies are, I would certainly, by the way, talk about air pollution, right? Particulates, our side has sort of decided that we won the battle on urban air pollution with EPA regulation. And so the public doesn't know that the EPA did a lot of great work, right? And helped us have clean air and clean water. But they also don't realize that particulate levels out there, which is to say the fine particles, the really small stuff under 2.5 microns, those are linked to dementia, right? There's actually better connection science between fine particles and autism than there is to any of the stuff that you hear in the from the Maha people. And if you really wanted to make this country healthy again, your number one villain would be fine particles, because those tiny particles can bypass all of the protections in your nose and your lungs, and they can go to the bloodstream, they can break the blood-brain barrier, and in fact, there's evidence that they can go straight from breathing into the nose into the brain, the really tiny ones. So, wake up, people. And in terms of water, guess what I would be messaging on? Microplastics, right? This is the oil industry. This is the disinformation campaign of the oil industry, that we need to do everything with plastics, and plastics are the miracle, and that they, better living through chemistry, that they don't have side effects. There is an increasingly rapidly growing amount of research on the dangers from microplastics. And I predict that by the end of this decade, it will be as big an issue as fine particles and getting up there with tobacco smoke, because it is a preventable risk. And guess what? I have a reverse osmosis filter in my house, and all you folks out there, I recommend it. I also recommend that you get an air quality filter, because again, you just don't want fine particles and you don't want to have microplastics. And those, so I would be telling people, guess what? You can reduce your risk for a variety of ailments that you don't want to get, you don't want your kids to get, you don't want to worsen their asthma, right? They're directly connected to your longevity, but most importantly, the quality of life you have at the end of your life, right? So let's not feel like we won. We didn't. We stopped messaging on all of that stuff for 2 decades, while the other side has pushed their bullshit that the EPA is somehow a force for bad. The EPA is what stands between you and, bad water and air that is harming you and your kids, Maha Moms. And until the Maha Moms start talking about particulates, they are not serious. And any Maha Mom, I'd be happy to talk to, go on any podcast. Yes, you do worry about important things. You should worry about red dyes. You should worry about, about a variety of things that, by the way, this administration is not going to do anything about, your hyper, processed foods. They should, but if you're not tackling fine particles in the air and fine particles in the form of microplastics, you are not serious about the public health of you, your family, your kids, and this country. So get on that. And I think that should be, by the way, the other thing I would message, which is going to be one of the biggest single issues in the next elections, is rising electricity bills.
Absolutely.
And guess what, folks? If you export your cheap natural gas, your gas prices are going up. And they are, right? Your natural gas prices are going up, and that is for your home heating, and that is for your electricity bills, because natural gas prices are the swing marginal cost, right? Because once you build a wind turbine or a solar panel, there's no fuel cost, right? So we have all these gas plants doing marginal stuff. And so, yes, right now, and I've written about this and I will write about it more, people's electricity bills are going up and they are pissed and they don't understand their bills. There was a very good podcast I heard, I think maybe, there was a good podcast by Jigar Shah, the one that Latitude Media does, open circuit. And yes, anyone out there, who wants more clean energy and wants to make the other side is messaging intensely that somehow cheap renewables are the source of high electricity prices. It is total nonsense. In fact, the literature is very clear. It's clear even in Texas that renewables have made things cheaper, reduced the peak demand, which is where prices get crazy, and have made the grid more stable. And people claiming otherwise are simply feeding you a bunch of lies. You want to know why your electricity bills are going up? It is very straightforward. First of all, we haven't invested in the grid for 10,
transmission as well.
Years. And we're blocking transmission lines, and we're making it hard to actually deploy renewables as fast as we could. And Trump has come in and has gutted the credits for renewables. And we're still going to build renewables and batteries because they're still going to be the cheapest and fastest to deploy. They're just going to be more expensive, right? So we have exporting our cheap natural gas in the form of liquefied natural gas, a bad idea that Biden at least put a pause on it. The fossil fuel industry loves it, but guess why? People need to understand, why do people want to export our gas, right? This is arbitrage. Natural gas is expensive in places like Europe. It's cheap here, right? What they want to do, and what they are doing, is taking our cheap gas, liquefying it, shipping it overseas, making a lot of money, and therefore reducing our amount of gas, setting our gas prices up. It is very basic supply and demand. I do not know why our side does not message on, hey, we're exporting our cheap gas to other nations and it's costing us problems. So that's one problem. Number two, you fight clean energy, you fight transmission, your electricity bills are going to go up. Number three, this nuclear stuff is insane. You want to build nuclear plants, that's great. But guess what? Nuclear plants, your bills go up before there's any electrons. The two Georgia plants, the last two plants that were built, the only two plants built in this country in the last quarter century, the Georgia Vogel plants, had people's electricity, people in Georgia, ratepayers had to pay $1,000 in the previous 12 to 15 years as the plant was constructed. And now every year for the next 6 decades, their bills are going to go up $200 a piece. So nuclear, anyone who's pushing nuclear, what they are pushing is higher electricity bills for you, even before you get any electrons. And then this fourth piece is this insane AI data center bubble. And you let it, I know you governors out there are like, oh, I want to get a data center, even though it doesn't create jobs. Yeah, it brings in revenues for your state. I get it. You are screwing over. You are totally screwing over all of the ratepayers in your state, because guess what? Your rates, you are just saying, I don't care about the residential ratepayers because they are the ones who are going to swallow this cost. And when you combine all of this, guess what? Electricity rates are going up. And any politician who is not speaking out about it and explaining this to you is part of the problem, and they should be voted out of the office, whatever party they are. There should be a massive rebellion about electricity rates, because if you think you don't like your electricity rates now and your bill is confusing and it's hard to plan month to month about what you have to allocate in your budgeting, and I know it is, it's going to be a nightmare over the next 2 to 4 years. So that's what I would message.
Those are good points. I really like what you said about the autism and fine particle pollution. You know, I think you pointed a lot of opportunities here. The challenge is massive in the United States, given what's happened with sort of Steve Bannon style take over the country. And as he said recently, one of the worst nightmarish quotes was, well, he was happy that they got elected out and Biden had 4 years because they gave him 4 years to plan this more thorough takeover. There's a shitload of work to be done. Joe Romm, you and I have been occasionally sparring in the past. I think we agree on the basics here. There's lots more to discuss going forward. Maybe we can come back on when you're not on Taylor Swift album release day, going to the movies, which is great. Anything you can do with a daughter or a son these days is good.
It is a chair. Yes, please.
It's a gift.
And look, let me speak to all the climate hawks out there. Do find things that can be a total distraction. The most important. People have always asked me this over the years, like, how do I keep doing it? I'm sure they've asked you the same question. It is challenging to be thinking about this all the time. So guess what? Don't do it. You don't have to think about it. The most important thing is whatever you do, it has to be sustainable, right? If you burn out, you're no longer part of the solution. So figure out, you don't have to do this 24/7. In a perfect world, it'd be great if I suppose we all could, but we're not. That we're just human beings. Spend time with your family. Find an out. I'm a blessing. I can spend time with my daughter, and I can listen to Taylor Swift lyrics, and immerse myself in that. And Andy, we have our differences over the years, but it is now clear in the grand scheme of things, they were microscopic.
Weird, isn't it?
It is weird, but I'm glad to be here, and I want to hear. Listen, do send me, a couple of your best songs, some of the ones you're most proud of. Definitely, we'll listen to them, and at some point, obviously, I've written a lot about the solutions. We talked about some of the solutions. I've written a lot about the things that are not real solutions, or at least are overhyped. And boy, not just hydrogen, but nuclear. Now I'm reading fusion articles again. We could have a whole thing.
Oh, I know. Actually, do you have just a couple more minutes?
Okay, I could do a couple more minutes.
Let's do a quick hype detector. You wrote a book. This is a revisit to a book, right?
It is, yeah.
You were writing about this. This is the first thing you were writing about way before you did.
Yeah.
Even climate progress, I think.
Yeah. Oh, it was, yes.
So what's the green hydrogen scam question? Is that, maybe that's not quite the right word?
I don't like to use the word scam. I don't even for things like carbon offsets, which I'm going to have a major review article come out Monday on carbon offsets. But the two worst ideas today, the ones that are farthest separated from reality, are the notion that hydrogen can be a major energy carrier. Okay, want to draw the distinction between hydrogen as a chemical feedstock, where it is quite useful, right? We use it to make ammonia, methane for fertilizer via ammonia, and ammonia is one nitrogen and NH3, one nitrogen and three hydrogens, right? One of the great miracle discoveries, right? How to do that, what the Haber-Bosch process and all that thing. So yes, this is how you feed the world. Maybe fertilizers aren't the best in the world, and we have to do something about that. But the point is, yeah, hydrogen has a lot of uses. You can use it to for reformulated gas, to make gas cleaner, adding and you can use it to make methanol and some chemicals, right? So that is 100 million tons of that a year. That's 2% of global emissions. We need to think about how to deal with that. Then there is this myth that you can use hydrogen to carry energy the way we use electricity as an energy carrier. You make it in one place, green, hopefully, you ship it, and then you turn it into something useful at the other end, or you burn it in the case of hydrogen, or you could turn it into whatever you want to turn it into. And hydrogen is just a lousy energy carrier. And it is a lousy energy carrier for a great many reasons, but from a point of view of green hydrogen, the problem is the opportunity cost. It is massively expensive and inefficient to turn. In order to make green hydrogen, you have to electrolyze water, right? And we could talk about other ways, but they're all far more dubious, and no one's really doing them. You take electricity, you run it through an electrolyzer, it splits water, which is H2O, into the hydrogen oxygen. You capture the hydrogen. You're going to have to figure out a way to store it, because it's the most diffuse and leakiest gas. You're going to have to figure out a way to transport it, which is generally expensive and hard to do and uses a lot of energy. And then you're going to have to convert it back, maybe with a fuel cell, which is also expensive and inefficient. Well, it's efficient, but only like 50% efficient. So at the end of the day, the whole hydrogen car thing, which is what got me started, and I ran the Office of Efficiency and Renewables, so we were in charge of doing R&D on solar and wind and a whole lot of things that did succeed. But we pursued a lot of things. They didn't all succeed, right? We were like sort of venture capital company, and we pursued hydrogen fuel cells, didn't know then all that we know, all that I knew 10 years later when I wrote about hydrogen. But running a car on hydrogen just doesn't make any sense, because you're going to throw away 80% of the electricity running it through the electrolyzer, through the storing, compressing or liquefying or transporting, and then you got to get it on the car, and then you got to run through the fuel cell. You're going to lose another 50%, and then you got to run it through. You run through the fuel cell just to convert it back to electricity to run an electric motor, right? So clearly, if you could make a car with an electric motor and a battery, and the battery was good enough, it was going to crush hydrogen. That was clear, not just to me. I didn't, that you would be able to go 3 or 4 times as far on the same amount of renewable power, right? And it would be much simpler, because you didn't have to buy the electrolyzer, you didn't have to buy the fuel cell. Now, the great myth, which was promulgated by many starting at the end of the 2010s into the early 2020s, pushed by my old place, the Department of Energy, was that we could drop the price of green hydrogen by a factor of 5, right? 80% drop from 5 kilograms, $5 a kilogram, which, by the way, it never was $5 a kilogram. That was the imaginary large scale price, down to $1 a kilogram in 2030, based on the notion that electrolyzers were going to come down a learning curve. But electrolyzers are not, most things don't come down a learning curve, people. All of you venture capitals out there who have business plans that are based on the thing someone is going to come down a learning curve the way solar and batteries did and continue to, most things do not come down a learning curve. That is the great exception. I realize it's in every business plan. Nuclear plants are going to come down a learning curve. Guess what? Never done it. In fact, they've gone in reverse directions. So if you think that there's some mystical learning curve that you have to get once you start scaling up, not true. You're right. It's just the literature explains, and we don't have time to go into it. But the point is, as it turns out, electrolyzers didn't go down 10% per year, as Bloomberg New Energy Finance and others projected. They went up 40 to 50% between 2021 and 2023, 2024, right? So that is what blew up all of the long-term contracts that people were thinking of signing for green hydrogen. There were no, as Jigar likes to say, no 10-year offtake agreements. So there is no there in green hydrogen. Just give one statistic. If you wanted to take all of the hydrogen used as a chemical feedstock in the world and produced by fossil fuels, most of it's produced by coal or gas. Gas is CH4, right? Methane, mostly methane, 1 carbon, 4 hydrogen, right? You split out the hydrogen, you release the carbon as CO2. If you wanted to replace just that existing hydrogen with renewable power, you would need the equivalent in renewable electricity of the entire US electric grid. Everything.
Yep.
Right. And guess what? I'm not going to say you can't do that, but that sounds like a good project for 25 years or more, right? So let's forget the notion that we should be wasting renewables and money and effort trying to turn a terrible energy carrier into a good energy carrier when we have a great energy carrier, electricity, which can power the cars, they can power the heat pumps, we can replace a lot of ground-based transportation, fossil fuels, we can replace a lot of natural gas for heating, and there's a world, we can get 60, 70, 80% of the way there before you have to worry about these exotic cases. So, I tell people, people say, oh, well, we'll have to get to, green steel sooner or later. And I said, yes, later. It is in the later category. The sooner category is the stuff that makes sense to use renewables and existing technology for. And if you want to do R&D on some of these other solutions over a 10-year period, so we figure out what the winner is, because you don't know what it is today, do it. But yeah, so
all right,
there you go. You got my little rant there.
No, it's a good rant. And
one more thing.
Yep.
Hydrogen, the leakiest of gases, we now know has a much higher global warming potential than we thought, because it's not a direct greenhouse gas, but as it escapes into the atmosphere, it extends the lifetime of methane and other gases, right? And its equivalent global warming potential over 20 years is 35 times that of CO2, right? Methane's is 80. But so the point is, the last thing you want to do is build a world where you increase methane production and use and hydrogen production of use, because the two of them together are a very potent short-term climate forcer, which is the thing that in theory we want to move away from. So I will just tell you, all those green hydrogen for energy carrier, you are making the problem worse, and you are flushing money down the toilet that could achieve a lot. That's the opportunity cost that could achieve a lot more benefits a lot more cheaply. And please do quote me on that. Okay.
Yeah. No, this has been great. And, that gets back at one of the questions Doug Grant had, which is who is the right audience? And clearly the venture capital world needs to have a reality dose. And
there are good venture capitalists out there. I have to say that because I'm often critical of venture capitalists who are funding good stuff. Like, let's make batteries. Let's figure out how to recycle batteries, right? That's a good. There are many good places for venture capital money, right? Let's pull cobalt, which we have done, out of batteries. So spend some money to pull out some of the other rare earth metals that we don't like. And guess what? A lot of money is going into that. And all the people who are rightfully worried about mining bad things to make our batteries, guess what? The scientific engineering and VC community is working on it, right? It's not as big a problem as climate, right? But so anyway, yes, venture capitalists, you have become a major part of the problem.
All right, Joe Romm, thanks for spending time. I'm going to go take us out with one of my early songs called
Please.
Liberated Carbon.
It took 1,000 generations for our species to rise, but gathering and hunting was no way to get by. We yearned to burn more than dung and sticks. Then someone came along and said, hey, try lighting this. He opened up the ground and showed us coal and oil. Said, come liberate some carbon, it'll make your blood boil. Liberated carbon, it'll spin your wheels. Liberated carbon, it'll nuke your meals. Liberated carbon, it'll turn your night to day. Hey, hey, come on and liberate some carbon, babe, it's the American way. Now I got peat swamp fossils running my TV. BP's black label burns in my SUV. We can light up the planet like a Christmas tree. Yeah, they say that things are getting hot, but hey, we've got AC. Liberated carbon, it'll spin your wheels. Liberated carbon, it'll nuke your meals. Liberated carbon, it'll turn your night to day. Hey, hey, come on and liberate some carbon, babe, it's the American way. Pump those electrons and that gasoline. No sweat or hurry, just turn on a machine. We send an army to the desert to keep this country free. Hey, hey, and to liberate some carbon, baby, for you and me. Liberated carbon, it'll spin your wheels. Liberated carbon, it'll nuke your meals. Liberated carbon, it'll turn your night to day. Hey, hey, come on and liberate some carbon, baby. Liberate some carbon, baby. Liberate some carbon, baby. It's the American way.
All right.
There you go.
Great song. We'll have to. We'll get. Maybe my daughter and I will talk about it on Decoding Taylor Swift at some point. But really enjoyed talking with you. And if people want to find me, LinkedIn, you can direct message me. I direct message a lot of people. Try to respond to the people who reach out.
All right, man. So it's good to see you. Have fun at the movie, and we'll have you on sometime to talk in depth, a little more depth about some of these questions. Maybe get Jigger on with you. That'd be fun.
I would love to come on with Jigger and have us come on nuclear. He and I don't. Jigger and I, like you and I, we agree on a whole lot of things, but we have certain edge case differences.
Oh yeah.
Anyway.
Well, that's I try to find room for agreement more than room for debate.
Well, look, I'm happy. I don't like we don't debate the science. I mean, there are things to debate about the science, but by and large, that there's no point in debating the science. The solutions, they deserve debate. Right?
Yeah. All right, you take care, and thanks again. This is Andy Revkin. This was Sustain What, and you can share the link you were watching on, or if you stumble on it, just share it, please, with others. Get in touch with me with ideas for future shows using all that distracting stuff at the bottom. And have a good weekend, everybody. Despite what's going on, find a way to engage, make a little bit of a difference, and move forward. Take care. And we are.